who took money for his law school from a Soros fellowship said he did it in a video defending himself, quote, when I didn't have the money.
When I didn't have the money and it was a merit scholarship.
Yet Fox News reported that he made millions of dollars that year and $1 million every year for a couple years prior.
Now, here, let me just speak to that point. I'm gonna let Vivek say his thing, but I'm just gonna give you my initial thoughts when I first heard this, and then I'll tell you. When I first heard this, I say, well, there's a lot of nuances to this, right? He said, I didn't have the money and I got an opportunity to get a grant. Well, just because you made $2.2 million don't mean that you have $2.2 million available to you. You can make $2.2 million as income, but you have expenses, you maybe have other things, or you may be investing your money and you don't want to waste it on college when somebody's going to give you a free scholarship, right? You know, why would you waste your money on college? They can give you a free scholarship. Come on. All right. So I thought that kind of crossed my mind that way.
So he lied about that. A man who made a fortune off of a failed Alzheimer's drug, and a man who just last year wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed in which he's from a salesman, Vivek. Well, he's whoever you want him to be, because just like Obama, he'll say whatever he has to say, even copying Obama, to tell the naive and foolish sheeple what they want to hear. Everyone's giving this guy softball interviews and weak debates. Vivek, if you want a real challenge, come on my channel. I don't buy your shtick at all.
So he called him out. He said, look, come on my channel. Everybody giving you softball interviews. You know, I think Vivek has been holding his own, but let's see what Vivek had to say as a response to some of the questions.
We're surging in the polls. The knives are coming out. The opposition research machines are churning. And you know what? That's a good thing, because I'm running to be your next president. I want to lead this country, and I better darn well be able to take some questions along the way. Stay skeptical. I would be too. Let me just address them transparently. Most popular questions we've gotten, in order. First, what is my relationship with the World Economic Forum? Answer, none, other than being probably their biggest critic here in the United States. And then the reason people are asking me this, though, is because the World Economic Forum named me on a list of so-called young global leaders. They did it despite the fact that I turned down their award. They kept my name on that list despite the fact that I repeatedly asked them to take it off because I did not share their values. I'm an opponent of it. Well, when they refused to do it, you know what I did? I sued them because I believe in taking action. That's the World Economic Forum question. Next popular question we get is, what is my connection with George Soros? Answer, none, zero. Indirect, direct, zero connection with George Soros. Why are people asking this question? It's because back in 2010, by the way, long before George Soros had completely fallen off the deep end and gone into these progressive causes, funding these disastrous, toxic prosecutors who are soft on crime, who I've also railed against. Long before then, in 2010, I won a scholarship when I was 24, 25 years old, headed to law school, that was partly funded by, not George Soros, but Paul Soros, who's a relative, a brother of George Soros, who made his money independently.
Is that true? Wasn't even George Soros. Is that true? Okay.
By the way, is now dead. That funded hundreds of people. Hundreds of kids won that scholarship. I was one of them to go to graduate school at the age of 24, 25, back when I didn't have a lot of money to do it.
All right, so he said a little bit about it. I think I put some words in his mouth on some other things, or at least I insinuated what I thought he was thinking about the Obama comments and stuff like that. You know what? I could ask him to interview him again. You know, I interviewed Vivek like a month or two ago, and I thought it was an incredible interview. I would interview him again. I'm going to reach out to his people to interview him. Maybe he think it's pointless to even talk about this stuff. But the same thing with Melania. Y'all remember when Melania like literally read Michelle Obama's speech word for word? Like she literally plagiarized the entire speech. Now we know that Melania didn't do it. Somebody writing her speech did it. I don't know if it was a prank or it was because somebody, you know, was dumb enough to think they can get away with recycling the first lady of the United States, the first black woman who's the first lady of the United States of America's speech. Moving forward, Vivek could have been victim of the same thing. Or maybe it was a tactic. I would love to ask him and say, okay, you seem to be quoting almost verbatim the little skinny joke that Obama did. Why did you do it? What's the difference? He already explained to George Soros, but I'm pretty sure he can knock it out in one interview. And then also some of the other things, the big pharma, the writing about his book. He clarified that on Chuck Todd, I think his name. What's his name? Chuck Todd. That the person on NBC, I forget his last name. Yeah, I think it's Chuck Todd. He clarified it on Chuck Todd's show, but I'm sure he can clarify that in a second.
All right, guys, we are back, and I am joined again by Vivek Ramaswamey and also my friend Rogan O'Hanley. You guys probably know him better as his online moniker, DC Drano. He is draining the swamp. He has been for a while. He posts tons of memes. It's a great follow if you're not following him. Definitely follow DC Drano on Twitter.
The loser of the last election refused to concede the race, claimed the election was stolen, raised hundreds of millions of dollars from loyal supporters, and is considering running for executive office. I'm referring, of course, to Donald Trump. Do you think that the 2020 election was fair? Do you think that Joe Biden got the most votes in American history, or do you think 2020 was rigged?
So I'll answer that. I think 2020 was rigged specifically by big tech, but I just want to say something at the outset because this is the first time we're meeting, is that I've actually been a longtime fan and of your tweets particularly. And I understand that I did a little bit come out of nowhere, right? I was in the business world. I had no public footprint at all until 2020 and then really 2021 when I stepped down from my job as a CEO. So I invite the scrutiny. Some of it's bad faith, but then I take someone like you and I understand your heart is actually in this for the country as opposed to some of the other trolls. And so that's why I'm engaging with this directly. So let me be really clear about something. I've written 3 books in the last 18 months. That passage has now been floating around Twitter. I'd encourage you to read the book, or at least even the chapter that came from. Those lines were tongue-in-cheek, in part because those were the opening words of the chapter. It was a dark day for democracy. The winner refused to concede the election, raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Those exact words. I'm referring to, of course, Stacey Abrams. That was literally the opening paragraph of that chapter. And it turned out that those words were literally borrowed from a description of somebody else criticizing Donald Trump that I then cut and pasted. So look, I have detailed messaging on all of this, but you read that chapter and you read that book, it's easy for someone to airlift something out of Nation of Victims without reading the whole book. It was literally a satirical chapter that started with those words that someone had used against Donald Trump with Stacey Abrams as the punchline. And here's the thing about the books I've written. I wasn't writing them with any intention of running for president, right? And so otherwise you'd read them and can this be misquoted? No. These are, if I may say so myself, I would say intellectual books. These are not candidate books, okay? These are books that were written in part of a career, 3 books in 20 months. Candace, and probably you, I don't know if you've written books as well, understand what it takes to write one. I've written 3 and they're not candidate books, are deeply introspective books. So much so that actually even some of the things that I said in Woke Inc., I've moved a little bit from today. What did I say in that book and I stand by it today? 2 things that I think are really important points. The 2020 election was stolen principally by big tech. The Google search algorithms that suppressed actual stories that you could have read on Donald Trump. Hunter Biden laptop story suppressed on the eve of an election. There's definitive data showing that actually would have changed the outcome of the election. I personally find that data, just like in terms of the raw numbers, even stronger than the data that's yet been presented on ballot fraud, though I think both existed. I've been very clear about where I stand on ballot fraud. Single day voting, election day as holiday, has to be paper ballots. And by the way, government issued ID matching the voter file. But I think what's more important to understand as well, and I talk about this in this book, is 2016 was actually even the other election that was stolen from Donald Trump, the election that he supposedly won, where he wasn't allowed to govern for those 4 years. And so the only thing I would say is there will be a lot of things that you and I may have slightly different points of view on. I think these will exist. But all I'll ask is, I know you're an intellectual as well. You're a guy who cares about the country. Read the books, not some sort of screenshot from Twitter of a purposefully airlifted passage. And about January 6th, what Candace mentioned, and I saw this in one of your tweets too, and I just want to address this, Rogan, just so you're aware. Somebody floated a passage where I said what Trump did that day was reprehensible on January 6th. I said this shortly thereafter. And again, that's another airlift. Read what it was. That wasn't a tweet from me. That was a reply to somebody else's tweet in response to a Wall Street Journal piece that I wrote
2 days after January 6th, or in the days after January 6th, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal that said that censorship, systematic censorship in this country, was the cause of January 6th. And in particular, it was government using tech companies to silence speech. And I said that that would be a friendly parley compared to what's to come. Somebody then asked me, do you excuse what Donald Trump did on that day? And I wanted to be clear, and it's something I'm saying today too, is that no, I would not have handled January 6th in the same way as Donald Trump. And that's a fact. And maybe you and I can disagree on that. I said it then, I stand by it today. But just like I said in the days after January 6th, which caused multiple advisors to my company to resign, which caused me to face great personal cost in the seat that I was in as a biotech CEO, that's the same thing I'm saying today. And so that's a long way of saying we may still have our disagreements, but I'd love to have those disagreements with the full context of what I've said rather than airlifting passages. I'm not accusing you of doing that, but that's what I've seen circulating a lot. And let's have real disagreements instead of fake ones. That's all I would say.
So Vivek, I'm just going to jump in here because I did not know, obviously, what you were going to say as an answer to that. And guilty as charged. When I saw the things being passed around, I actually thought maybe he actually did say this. And I will completely own the fact that I did not read it and I cannot defend. I cannot further offend it because obviously what you're saying in defense makes sense that it was airlifted. Rogan, did you actually read the full chapter either, or did you also see what was circulating? Okay. So what's funny about that as a Trump supporter?
It's not my main point, right? Yeah. So let me preface by saying I respect Vivek for coming on and having this discussion, knowing that I'm a very vocal critic. My main point is that Vivek does not believe there was actual election fraud with the ballots, that he can watch something like 2,000 Mules. Did you see 2,000 Mules, Vivek?
I've seen part of it, I have to admit. I did not finish it, but
I highly recommend you go watch it because it's probably one of the most important documentaries in recent history that showed massive systemic election fraud across this country. And to me, as a vocal supporter and just a voice for the MAGA base, I will say, if you do not believe that there was election fraud beyond what big tech suppressed, that they are not muling around hundreds of thousands, if not millions of ballots, that if at 3 a.m. in the Detroit TCF arena, they didn't drop off hundreds of thousands of ballots on video, that the Gateway Pundit has exposed, that they were banned from Twitter, that there was no Republican supervisors, that we saw vote spikes in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania overnight in the dead of night, that they shut down Georgia for a water pipe break, and then suddenly they pull out ballots out of under the table and start counting. If you don't think that there is election fraud, in my opinion, that is disqualifying for anyone running in the GOP, because this is not politics as normal.
Let me just say one thing to that about my view.
Is aggressive. They are
I want
coming
to just
after
jump
us.
in here. I just want to jump in here. And so first and foremost, I will say that I believe that there was election fraud. And I've made that statement over and over again.
I do too,
I've
example,
tweeted that. I mean, by the way, mail-in ballot fraud, 100% agree with Rogan on this point. I do want to say, let's not bifurcate here because it is relevant to say that there are quotations being passed around that are out of context. So I do want to own that and say to Vivek, thank you for explaining that. It is relevant that you were using something that was pertaining to Stacey Abrams. To move on the discussion to talk about mail-in ballots is actually really important as well. So first off, Rogan, to ask you this question, and only because I only found this out recently.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Can I say one thing quickly to clarify my view here? I, based on everything I've seen, believe there was absolutely ballot fraud. Rogan, here's one of the things I'll say is we all have our areas of expertise. Until I decided to enter the political arena, as opposed to criticizing stakeholder capitalism and the World Economic Forum agenda and central bank digital currencies and ESG, where my focus has been, this has not been an area where I've dived as deep. So what I will say is, yes, there's been ballot fraud. What I see that is damningly convincing, driven by data, is that absolutely, I have seen enough data to know that the 2020 outcome of the election would have been different if the Hunter Biden laptop story had not been suppressed. If Google had not made an illegal campaign contribution of the largest scale in human history to the Biden campaign by suppressing and changing the way search algorithms works. So there, I'm actually definitively convinced that it changed the outcome of the election. I haven't said that it didn't in the case of the ballot fraud. I just said truthfully, and it's a fact now, and I'm very open to data to convince me of it. I haven't seen data of that scale on the election changing outcome, and that's what I've said, and I'm open about that. But I just want to be clear always where my views are and where they aren't. And so that's, I think, a fair discussion for us to have.
Which is fair. I mean, I've sat down with people and they've wanted me to say something, and I'm like, to be honest, I don't know that confidently myself yet, so I don't want to say something because everybody else is saying it. But Rogan, you've done a great job of sharing the gateway pundit stuff over the last couple of days. Vivek, I really would recommend that you really
somewhat recent, but it said, I actually fully agree with that. And one of the things where I think the Republican Party needs to define where we actually stand, there is an anti-legal immigration current among voters. I'm going to be on the debate stage in a month, and if anybody has any qualms with this, I think I'm going to have a real problem with that, because merit-based immigration is one of the fixes to economic growth in this country, effectively saying that we need more high-skilled immigrants to come in, take
not
American jobs,
saying, just say what I said.
To create more profits for capitalism.
The latter part of that's not what I said, though,
stock.
Rogan. Rogan, I just want to be really fair. I think you mixed a quote with a lot of editorializing you added in the end. So I'm not reading the article, but just be fair and say what I actually said, because up to when you started going off on your own, that's consistent with views that I have, and then you started saying things that are entirely inconsistent with views that I have.
So, Rogan, do you want to just read the quotation of what they said?
I think it's a little unfair.
Said?
It's a little unfair, because I can tell you what my views are.
Mixing up the quote with my personal editorial. There is an anti-legal immigration current, and then it says in brackets, mood among voters, ... I'm going to be on the debate stage in a month, and if anybody has any qualms with this, I think I'm going to have a real problem with that, because merit-based immigration is one of the fixes to economic growth in this country, end quote.
Sure. So let me explain my position on immigration policy, if I may. Okay.
Yes.
The North Star, and I think I'll start with where we definitely agree, and then I'll go to where we may disagree, and we may not, actually, but let's find out. I believe the purpose of immigration policy, to state the obvious, right? Everybody should agree with this. It is so obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. The purpose of our legal immigration policy should be to advance the interests of citizens in this country.